This episode discusses sensitive topics, including suicide and mental health struggles. The content may be triggering or difficult to hear. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is also not a substitute for professional help. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please reach out for support. In the United States, you can dial or text 988 to connect with the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are outside of the U.S., please seek local resources or hotlines available in your area. You are not alone. Help is available. Alrighty, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Motivation and That. I'm Natalie, your host, and my guest today, for the folks that have been around since the start, is a familiar one because it's our first repeat guest on the pod, and so topic too because it is massively timely for both Amjed and myself, and I think it's going to resonate so strongly with so many folks that are out there right now. We did a little bit of research digging, we brainstormed some topics, we've thought about different ways to think about this and bring it all around, and I'm gonna hit you right off the bat, Amjed, with just one little thought to get us started, which was when I was thinking of a working title for this episode. I was like, oh, we're going to call it Dear Me, Shut Up. And then I was like, oh, no, that's not like, I actually don't want to tell myself in the negative self-talk and all of that. It's not a conversation of shut up, right? It's this, let's figure out how to understand ourselves and how to shift and work with who we are and everything. So it was great. It was a good like lesson for myself of, come on, Natalie, let's actually like see what we're doing here. And this is going to be great. But for those that maybe didn't hear the first episode, or they're like, wait a minute, let me remember who Amjed is, give me like the 2-second rundown on who you are and a little bit about that. And then we'll link in where we were last time and how the heck we got so quickly and so easily into this topic. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been chatting back and forth about it since we stopped the other conversation, or paused the other conversation, I should say. So a little bit about me. My name's Amjed, and I am just a normal guy. I like to think of myself as an average. As a matter of fact, this will be interesting discussion for today's episode. For the longest time now, as I've been working on this journey, I like to think of myself as an average person, no better or worse than anyone else. And it just really helps, like, kind of set that tone of, I'm not trying to be better than everybody else, but at the same time, I'm not constantly judging myself for being worse than everyone else. And so just an average guy. My story is that, I guess the really quick version, long history of mental health struggles, suicidal ideation, and also, here comes the trigger warning, right? I'm also a suicide survivor. I have at least 3 solid attempts, a couple others depending on how you count it. And I'm just really fortunate to be around, and finally have gotten the professional help that I needed in 2007. And so, I started a podcast a little while back, My Humanity is Showing. It's just an opportunity to share and pay it forward. And I think you and I were chatting about podcasts in general, and we realized we have a lot in common in terms of how we have experienced the world and how we think. So it's just a natural connection.
It really is. And, our first episode that we really got into just the idea of gratitude and how it doesn't have to be this idea of I sit down and every morning I write a gratitude journal out, but there are practices throughout the day and things that, we can take moments to understand the messiness of it too. And more than once in that conversation, we hit on shame and embarrassment and how that connects with anxiety and all of the different pressures that we almost put on ourselves more than anyone. And it was funny when we were talking about this, and I remember you said, hey, like, what did we really like? What were the moments that we had nuggets that we wanted to revisit? And I put everything into ChatGPT and I went, hey, go listen to this episode, summarize for me. And it did. and it pulled up, hey, you guys mentioned negative self-talk. You talked about perfectionism, self-love and affirmation, self-care, giving grace, and forgiveness of self. And I was like, wow, what a great kind of shift point to move into this conversation of what the heck are we forgiving ourselves for in the first place? Why do we need to do that? What are the little, the devil and angel on the shoulder, or the little voices in your head? Are they yours? Are they someone else's? And so we get to peel those layers back today. And I am super excited for that. So when we were opening up this door of like, okay, now we're going to get into negative self talk and imposter syndrome and all of those internal yucky pressures. When we were thinking about how to or components of this conversation, and it's a really powerful discussion for me. It brings a lot of feelings to the surface. It brings a lot of memories, experiences to the surface. But what were you thinking when it was kind of like, all right, hey, we're going to tread into this really murky water? What did it kind of bring up for you? What were the first things that you were like, oh, there's what rises up, and where I'm feeling like I'm going to start grabbing points to really discuss and jump into?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because I'm not sure if I remember exactly what the initial points were. Shame is such a big part of my story. I often say I'm a shameaholic because I'm just addicted to shame. Like the way my brain is wired, it's almost like I know at one point in my life, I would be driving home from work and my head would be replaying the day to look for things to shame me for. Like it literally would be like it would be a moment by moment, play by play recap of the day. And it's like, okay, let's start at the beginning. What was the first conversation you had? How badly did that go? And then, okay, there wasn't anything terrible in there, but I'm sure you messed up the next one. And then it would go to the next conversation. And my brain would, until it finally latched onto some weird little thing that happened and be so minuscule. And it'd be like, yeah, there it is. See, I knew you were useless. So shame is just a really big part. When you were talking about the name of the episode and you mentioned, like talk, what is it? Dear me, and, shut up or whatever. It reminded me of a couple of things. So I wanted to jump on that real quick. One is I heard this in a motivational talk one time. So I guess it's appropriate to bring it up here. The guy was talking and he said he was talking to this elderly, like wise man, well, not a wise guy, but like an elderly wise statesman kind of thing. And the statesman asked him, that voice that you hear in your head? And he's like, yeah, the one that's like always chattering. He said, what about it? That's me, right? Like that's my personality. And he said, no, you're the idiot listening and believing everything it's telling you. And so first time I heard that, I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, what a reframe for me that was, in the sense of like, I didn't have to believe that I am that voice that's constantly belittling me. Like I'm there, the me is the part that actually exists and that listens and observes the world. And the voice doesn't necessarily have to be me. And another friend of mine calls that voice the saboteur. I call it the internal critic. There's other names for it. Actually, I named it. I call it Chester the critic. It's like, oh no, sorry, it's Buster, because he's always busting my chops. Chester the critic is the one who looks at other people and goes, I can't believe he did that. But Buster, see, I think I may have shared this last time, I don't remember, but I believe I have a series of little 13-year-olds that live in my head that are always chattering. It's like Inside Out, except like a really unhealthy version of it. And they're all just like sitting in my head. And there's like Fester, who's like always scared to death. There's, so Buster is the one who's always busting my chops. He's the bully. He's the one who's like, yeah, you don't know what you're doing. Just even today, like you and I had set a time, and like 2 minutes before we started, I finally finished my last work call. I was like, I haven't eaten anything solid for most of the day. I just need a couple of minutes to grab a bite to eat and come on. And you were so gracious, but that voice was so active. It's like, there you go again. You cannot keep a commitment. And, I think I even, when we scheduled this, I said, let's start a little bit later because it's like, it always seems like there's something. And I still couldn't meet the time that we said. So, like I said, shame is just such a big part of my story.
Yeah. But let's tell the whole story. I forgot to send you the invite to the whole recording. So, I mean, while you're having your internal shame thing, I'm over here going, wow, what a great podcast host. You just set up an empty appointment that you couldn't even send the invite to the right person. And it's the second time I've done it. So it's like, you know, you're focused in on your part of the experience, and meanwhile across the pond is another person doing the same exact thing. And it's so, we spend so much time criticizing, so Chester coming out, right, ourselves, or thinking of how the other person would criticize us, that it's like, well, what am I actually thinking? Like, which thought is mine that I should be tapping into and I should be embracing?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because as when I started on this journey, I was actually sharing this with someone at work today. When I started on this journey of really working on shame, we had recently watched, there was the movie How to Lose a Guy. No, what is it?
How to
How to
Lose a
Lose a
Guy in
Guy
10 Days.
in 10 days, right? I was like it's the one with Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson. So anyway, we had just watched that, and it's the first time I'd ever seen the game Bullshit. It's like I had kind of heard of it, but I hadn't really seen it in any way. And I remember us watching that. And it was about that time that I was working on the shame stuff. So I know this is probably like a weird coping mechanism or whatever, but I started doing that to myself. Like if I heard of something in my, like internally, that monologue, dialogue, whatever you want to call it, that was shaming, I would just literally call out bullshit. I'm like, no, I refuse to believe that I'm a horrible person. I refuse to believe that I'm an idiot. I refuse to believe blank, fill in the blank, right? And that was really helpful because it gave me an opportunity to start building an alternative narrative. And, there's an ancient Eastern proverb that says, that something about the two dogs that are fighting, which one wins. I'm sure you've heard that, but it's like, if
Not
like two dogs are in a fight, which one wins, right? It's the one you feed. And so there's this, if there's I think the proverb is referring to like the battle of good and evil within a person. But I think of it, like I often think of that analogy or that metaphor in terms of the shame and the self-compassion and love, and those two voices. And which one am I supporting? Which one am I reinforcing? Which one am I feeding? Because that's the one that's going to have the louder voice, and the other one's going to have less strength in my head.
Yeah, and it's, I love this conversation on the voices because, you've got your inside out characters, the 13-year-olds, and they're doing their thing. And I read a book, and I had just put a blog up on it called Good Morning Monster, and it is, I mean, a trigger warning heavy book. But one of the cases in the book, she has what she calls tapes that play in her head of her things her dad told her over, and she said they're loud and they're nonstop. And so the psychiatrist and her are working through them. And I took that to therapy this week, and I said, I have Jeanisms in my head. My mom's name's Jean, and I said every single thing that I question, I can tie back to something that my mom told me that eventually became an internal belief. And so I hear it in my voice, but the authorship belongs to someone else
Right.
that, just kind of nestled in there and never got away. And my therapist, and I said, I guess I should start writing those down so that we can talk about them. And she goes, how about you put them in an email and you send them to me and you don't sit there with them, because there's no reason to sit there with them at that point. Like, just send them over. And next time we meet, we'll go through it. And I thought, what a beautiful idea. I can just put them in the mail. Like, just take the little statement, tie it up, envelope, postmark, off it goes. And it seems so silly, but making that distinction on what is something, to your point, that you truly believe that really is you and your self-talk to you versus someone else, and or something else that you've been brought to believe over time, whether society has said it or a person has said it. So when we tap into shame, because I personally believe that shame is so driven by others placing certain expectations on us at some point that then we like mutate into other powerful things. We feed it in many ways, right? And it takes this ickiness in our life. What are some of the things, if you're comfortable sharing them, that you had as the most powerful drivers of shame?
Yeah, actually. So, I mentioned at the beginning my struggles with suicide and suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. I recently, actually, I had not put my finger on it till recently. And so recently I got closer to identifying what the actual root cause of that is. And for me, it actually if there's one thing out of all the things, if there's one thing that I could put my finger on and say, that is the biggest trigger warning for me in terms of shame, it is if I believe that I have harmed someone, that I have a really difficult time like living with that and accepting that and moving. And actually this past weekend was a perfect example. On Friday, I was talking to a very good friend of mine, and she started crying like during the conversation, and it was because of something that I had done. And I basically confessed that I had had a conversation with someone else behind her back, and I finally just came clean and confessed it. And she felt that her trust had been violated, and that I kind of, and she kept asking me the question I could not answer, which was why. Like, why did you do it? Like, what compelled, why couldn't you have just come and talked to me about your concern? Like, why did you have to go talk to this third person? And, I said, it's because I was afraid of your reaction. And I was afraid that it would hurt our relationship. And I didn't, it's like I was afraid if I came to you and so I reached out to this other person in a way to say, like, bail me out. I need help. Can you get out of this? Right. So, I mean, obviously she was very upset. That was on Friday. Monday, we had a holiday. So we didn't speak again until Tuesday. I had so much pain on Monday that I just slept all day. Like, the experience of it was so painful. Like, while I was waiting for her to heal, I slept a lot. Like, I mean, I literally slept hours and hours on Monday. My family was kind of worried about me because they knew what had happened, and they knew I was being really hard on myself. Fortunately, none of that turned into a terrible shame spiral. I just kind of needed an opportunity to rest. And I'd also been traveling. And so that was, a part of that was like, I just needed to rest. And in my sleep, like I'm reinforcing with voices of, you didn't do that because you're an evil person. You didn't do that on purpose to hurt her. You acted out of fear. And, it's like, I believe fear is one of the, if not the root cause of all dysfunction. Like, I'm just convinced of it. Right. So that's probably, like I said, that's my biggest thing. Like, anytime, particularly when I hurt people that I'm really close to, like a family member, a loved one, a close friend, there's this voice in my head that says, see, you always hurt the people that get close to you. And then my desire is to like drive away. And so to end on a positive note, I guess this is the thing I really wanted to celebrate, which historically, I would have been really struggling with suicidal ideation all weekend long. The closest I got to that this past weekend was wanting to resign from my job. That was like the closest that I got. There was like a moment where I was like, maybe you should resign. And I was like, okay, that's ridiculous. Like, no, we're not even going to go down that road. That for me demonstrates growth. Like, I'm just really grateful for that. I can't take credit for it, but I'm just really grateful that there's healing. And not growth really is not the right word. I think healing. And that even though I was in a lot of pain and experiencing shame, I wasn't giving into the shame and letting it own me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. And I think that, it's interesting to hear what's driving that in you. I'm one of the people that mine was more if I couldn't keep people safe and happy, that's where I felt like I had failed. And then the failure would just build and build and then I would just want to just disappear into nothingness. Like I was like Homer Simpson into the bushes. Like I was never
Yeah.
here. Except there were no bushes to ever go to. And, it's so different for different people. Maybe it's the fear of the known or the unknown. It's still that fear component, I think, for sure. And when I was prepping for this episode today, because I procrastinated, I came across, and we'll link the articles from Holly Hill Hospital, and they had reframed, and we mentioned this before we started recording, these ideas as cognitive distortions. And I thought that was really interesting because it's not, I don't want to say it's not always negative self talk. Like there are reasons sometimes that we do kind of end up in these paths. And maybe it is because we had a known experience that did ultimately, end up in something that now we've, to one of the points of the type of distortions, overgeneralized. And we think every time that similar situation happens, same outcome. I'm the catastrophizer. And that 100% was one of the groups. And I was like, or the all or nothing. Like I felt so seen in that moment where a paper clip will fall and somehow my whole house is going to fall down like within the next year because I dropped a paper clip on the floor. Like that it's wild. But somehow I
Yeah.
rationalize that and make that make sense. And then you feel shame for the fact that you were having that distortion. So then it just multiplies. And it's like, oh God, I know I shouldn't be feeling like this, but I do. And now I'm shamed because I feel like this. And now who do I talk to? So you mentioned your family was a little concerned potentially, or they, hey, what's kind of going on here? What is the role in your life that that support system has played? And I think of the story you told on our first episode with your friend who was like, you're not that important. And it's a very
Yeah.
different support system. But
Yeah.
what are those different roles that you find that people kind of become involved in either your battle with the shame or the distortions, or in some cases maybe supporting them in some way, whether we want to admit it or not.
Right. That's a good question. So I'm torn because I have like two thoughts going at the same time. One, I'll put a little pin in it, and if we get time, maybe we can come back to it. And that is, we started talking about the impact of childhood on kind of this shame cycle. So I wanted to share a little bit more about that because I have some experience on that. So I want to put a pin in that for a second and answer your current question, which is the support structure and support system. I know for me, of course, my family is definitely a big part of that. I am very fortunate in that as a result of my mental health background and some of the struggles that I've been through, that I'm actually part of a couple of support groups. And so folks that have similar struggles, similar histories, that it's just really helpful that I can get on a phone call and call one of them and share. And they're like, yep, 100%, that's happened to me. This is where I was, and this is what's helped me. And so that, like being able to have someone that I can truly relate to, that gets it, that is not just sort of pretending like they understand, but they actually do understand that, like, and their experiences are evidence of that, I think is really, really helpful for me. Because at the end of the day, there's this, I think a lot of my fear and the shame and all of that is directly tied to my fear of abandonment and fear of rejection. And it's like, yeah, if you're a screw up, therefore you will be abandoned. People will eject you from their life. Like there's as a matter of fact, this is going to sound really weird. I have had resentment against the people that have not ejected me for not ejecting me. Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you not get me out of your life? Like, why would you allow me to continue to hurt you, and allow me to still be in that position of harming you? and not just cut the cord like you were supposed to, like a normal person would do, So I think, but having that kind of a support group is really, really helpful for me. So I would, it's like, I would encourage anyone that if you can find a community that you feel like you belong in, then it's really helpful to have that. And having a few folks is really helpful. On the flip side, it's also important for me, and it's a good example. Like I was talking to my wife about a little bit about what happened, and for her, it was very easy for her to see the other perspective, having been the recipient of that kind of error on my part in the past, and to say, "Oh yeah, I would be upset too." And she didn't mean it in any way except that she was relating to the other side of the experience. And I just had to say, okay, I need to pause the conversation because I appreciate you trying to help, but I'm not finding that helpful at the moment. Because it was just like the shame voice was like, see, I told you. See, there it is. And then she was able to recognize as well, and we were able to pivot the conversation in a different direction and kind of circle back to it later from an position of more support, and she was able to be that support. And I don't blame her because she's been the victim of many of my errors and many of my mistakes and harms, some more recently. So that I guess I would say it's important to have people you can talk to, and it's important to know when the conversation is not being helpful, and being able to say, I love you. Thank you for caring about me and wanting to support me. But right now I'm either not in a position to hear what you're saying, or it's not resonating for me and I need to step away from this conversation. So that, that awareness, it takes practice. It takes a little bit of work.
Okay, well, I'm going to use that next time, my husband and I, and he thinks it's a very simple solution, and I'm so busy catastrophizing the breakdown of my house that I can't process any of it. But I
The
think,
sky is falling. The sky is falling.
but let's take the pin out of what you just put in from the second half, because to me, there is a connection here, which is, you mentioned like, hey, I love you, but now's not the moment. And for me, that was not a message that I ever got growing up, and why I allowed so much stuff, I think, to just kind of jumble on in there and then become these repeating isms or tapes or things. And I chuckled a little when you mentioned childhood, because when we were putting the artwork together for the first episode, you're like, oh, I'll send you this picture I have that I used on my podcast, and it made me go looking for pictures of me when I was a kid. And it's this idea, I think, of that's your most formative time, and yet those are when some of the first connection points with experience, cause, outcome, all start to formulate. And our parents weren't perfect. Our families or our systems around us then weren't perfect. But so often that becomes very deep rooted. So tell me what was coming to mind about kind of childhood and that impact. Pull the pin.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Pull the pin out. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for circling back to that. Cause I was like, whoa, I really want to share about that. So a couple of things. One, I just thought of a different childhood photo that I need to send you for this episode. So I'll definitely do that. So I think for me, there's a couple of things that really, so I've done a lot of work in this area because of some of the childhood stuff, including EMDR, which was like that deep trauma work on some of the situations that happened. Actually, we did it on one in particular, which I consider like one of my worst memories. And it really helped to unpack that memory. And now every time I have that memory, I crave milkshakes. So it's because my brain finally reprocessed it and connected it to a time where I was with my wife and kids at Steak and Shake and like just laughing and drinking milkshakes. And so I took my worst memory and connected to one of my favorite memories. It's very interesting if you haven't done trauma work, and there's all kinds of different areas in that. So anybody who's listening, highly recommend, if you've got some deep-seated trauma, doing some work on that and allowing that reprocessing to occur. So some things that came up for me. One is that there's been a constant reminder for me in that work that this is a generational thing, and to not just pin it on my parents and saying like, oh, it's all their fault. They had a perfect childhood, but made sure that I didn't, but that, and I really struggle with that. As a matter of fact, like it's not so much my parents, it's my grandfather that I've done that with. Cause I, for the longest time, held the belief that he had the perfect childhood. Everything was wonderful and great. Yet he, there was a very toxic home that my father grew up in, and that's what got passed down to me. And so my wife often says, she's like, you have no idea. You have no idea what his childhood was like. You have zero knowledge of that. And that's been helpful because I carried a very deep resentment for that, like for my grandfather for a really, really long time. So that, it's like, I guess to finish that story, why? Well, how did that happen, right? Like every time we had a negative episode at home, I'll call it that, my father would sit down with me afterwards and apologize and share a traumatic story from his own childhood and how that story is what drove his behavior that day. And that was his attempt of saying, like, I don't do this to you because I want to, but it's just, there's all this, I've got all this baggage that I'm carrying. What happened for me is it ended up being, what's the term for, like deflection or something? Like, I can't think of the word, but it's, I took whatever anger I might have had toward my father and repositioned it toward my grandfather. And so that's where a lot of that resentment went in. Okay, so that's topic number one, is that this kind of trauma is often not, it is not a single point of a single source. It is generational. The second thing is that it's really important for me to remember that I had a part in that as well. And you mentioned it, you've said it a couple different times, but I really wanted to call it out because you talked about how like that internalization of what's happening. And, this is where, there's so many studies, there's stories, there's, I have close friends that have shared this kind of experience where two siblings growing up in the exact same house with the exact same childhood, and one internalizes it in a completely different way than another. And so I had a close friend one time who said, like, she's like, my sister and I talk often. It's almost like I sometimes wonder, were we in the same house? Because the way she describes our childhood, I don't remember it being that bad. Like, because she internalized it in a different way. And so it's not to place blame on myself or fault, but it's just to recognize and appreciate that I have a filter and I have a lens. And so things that happen to me, I have gone through that lens and landed a certain way. So it's not like I'm just an innocent victim to circumstance. I was an active participant in formulating those identities and those belief systems. And now, of course, I was a kid, so I might not have known any better. But what's empowering about that is to recognize that today I can work on that filter and I can work on that lens and start to make changes in it. And then the final one. So I know I'm kind of going long, but there's like three big childhood points that I wanted to hit on. So number one is that it's generational. Number two is that I was an active participant in the development of those thoughts and behaviors. And the final is this, I kind of hit on it. I'd forgotten about it, and I hit on it when I was sharing just now. And that is that often for me, the source of these negative things is resentment. And if you're not familiar with the term resentment, it actually comes from the Latin rescende, which means to re-feel. So it's where I take a feeling and put it on an instant replay loop and just keep playing that feeling over and over and over again until it magnifies and magnifies and magnifies and magnifies. And it's that resentment that separates me from others. So today, what I work on is not giving in to the desire to resent. And so if something happens, like somebody even, let's say, purposely does something negative to me, I often say to myself, like, I'm choosing to not resent. I'm not going to hold on to this anger or this frustration, whatever it is. And instead, I'm going to lead with empathy and compassion, recognize that this person may or may not have done it intentionally. It's none of my business. And I'm not going to internalize it and let it land in a way that's going to cause permanent damage for me. And so that like kind of is the last part of the equation for me, is to really watch for those resentments, because those resentments, they I do feel like I'm going long, but I heard this in another talk one time where the speaker said that if you think about a resentment, it's actually like cutting the cord of light between me and another person. And so like if I develop a resentment against you, it's like I've cut the cord of that light that travels between us. And what happens if I do that enough, I'm sitting in the dark, because all I've done is cut out all the sources of light from myself. And then I'm just sitting in the dark. I'm no longer in the sunlight, in the spiritual sunlight. I'm just in the dark. And so I found that really helpful too. Okay, I'm going to pause and let you get a word in.
No, so I mean, and I'm just gonna kind of reiterate a few of those. I think the generational thing huge. I've caught myself now going like looking at some of those childhood experiences with fresh eyes, like, oh, how my mom and grandma interacted, and me going, oh, I'm like falling into the same patterns in a lot of ways. But it was really interesting. My mom's cousin, who listens to the podcast, shout out to Judy, put a comment on one of my Facebook posts that I put up. It was very snarky about this whole like mom-daughter relationship thing. And she said, I don't know your mom as a mom. What I do know is that growing up as the Beasley child, so in that family line, is not something anyone really should have gone through. And I thought that it was this beautiful thing, right? It wasn't placing blame. It was acknowledging that there was a whole line of people that really didn't know how to parent, and we've just kind of passed it on and passed it on, but awareness being a really good first step. And it was so calming in like this weird way. And I was just like, oh, I feel heard, but I don't feel like we're, harming anyone. It just felt weirdly good. And, being a part of then not wanting to create that next round of the same behaviors. In our case, it's playing victim. It's like, oh, I was just here and everything's happening to me. And why is it happening to me? And not doing that with my husband, who, I drop something and I'm like, why didn't you pick that up right away? And he's like, are you kidding? And I was like, you dropped it. I was like, yeah, and you should have picked it up. Like, and in that instance, I was like, oh my gosh, I am repeating history. So it's that back to that thing of the voice that screamed in my head, don't let people know you dropped something. Point out that someone else didn't get it right away. Like just move them to the next phase. I don't necessarily want to silence that voice. I just want to know why the heck it's yelling really loud at that moment. Like, why was that the defense mechanism that immediately popped forward? And it went brain to mouth before there was ever a chance to like intervene. But those are the really loud voices. Those are the Chesters and the Busters and and the joys and sadness and all that. And it's hard to, and I think one of the forgiveness pieces is we're not going to change that generational process overnight. We're not going to change it for everything. But if we can change one of those voices a little bit and not hand it on or not reinforce it to the next group, I think we're starting at least to shift the energies or the balance or whatever it may be into a direction that at least can get some momentum with it. And I think this pulls us into probably what will be the last major topic we hit on and what I think we'll build into further, which is this idea of shame and imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And how weird it is that you can sit in a room, be like, I don't belong here. And that's your little voices going, you're not good enough to be at this table. You're not smart enough to be around this group, or you don't look like everyone else. So why the heck did you think you could be present? And now it's become a professional thing. And now it's not just me and my family or my unit, but it's all the people I serve that I'm now placing this weird expectation on to tell me I'm doing a good job, like reinforce to me that I should be here. And no one knows that expectation. Like, we might be exuding a little bit, but it's not coming out. And I remember the first time I said I had imposter syndrome, and about 10 people in the room went, "You?" I was like, "Yeah, it's really bad too." So, when did you first realize, have you had it? When did you first realize you were probably experiencing that? And what's your journey been like with the whole idea of imposter syndrome, which honestly now is like a hot word, I feel like, but
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so before I share that, one thing I have to say is, so my version of your pick up the pen is, what have you done? So I'll give you an example. Like one time I put a cup of coffee in the microwave and I accidentally had the lid still on it. So it was one of those like kind of Starbucks type cups. And I put it in the microwave, turned it on, and I accidentally, instead of doing 30 seconds, I did 2 minutes. And I heard a noise. I turn around and there's like this fountain of coffee like spewing in the microwave. And I walk over and I literally yell out, "What have you done?" And my wife turns around and is like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Look what you did to the microwave." I like open it up and she's like, "That's your coffee. Like you put that in there." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right." But I immediately talk about that transference. Like I immediately was, and it's become a standing joke in our family because I do it all the time. Like I'm like now I just kind of chuckle to myself because my instant thought is like, why did somebody put this right here? And then I realize if I pause long enough, I realize that I'm the one who put it there. So anyway, I just had to share that because I laughed so hard when you shared that story because that's like an ongoing joke in our house of like, oh, great, it's my fault now, huh? Well, actually, when I was growing up, so to end the childhood conversation, when I was growing up, my grandmother nicknamed me Target because anything that happened in our family was always my fault. Even if I wasn't there when it happened, it was always my fault. Like she used to joke with me. We'd be driving down the road and she and I'd be sitting in the back seat and she'd elbow me and go, "Look, they named a store after you." Because that's like literally when my parents moved overseas when I was in college, my mom would like, sometimes my parents would call me and chew me out for things that my brother and sister did overseas. And I'm not even there. And they're like, "But it's your fault ultimately." And I've kind of taken that on even in my profession where it's like, I'm like always like, "Oh, it's my fault. I don't know what happened, but I'm pretty sure it's my fault." And I will immediately like, that's like another standing joke at work. I'm like, if all else fails, just blame it on me. Like I'm used to it. I'm used to that. So switching to this imposter syndrome, but anyway, go ahead.
Hold on. I have to put an appendix on that before we get to my dad. Anytime something happened, he would say, "Remember two things. I love you and it's always my fault." Like, as in his fault. Like, he was the one pulling the transference. And I thank you for saying that word. But he would, and I
Yeah.
feel like that's why I say, "Why'd you drop the pen?" Because it was always like I did it. But,
Yeah.
yeah. And, and I always said that that was probably the most harmful thing he ever said to me because I was always like, "Okay, whose fault is it then? If it's not mine, because it was my dad's fault all the time, like it's got to be someone
Yeah.
else's." And then to your point, realizing it's you, and then, oh gosh, how do I deal with this really awkward feeling? So, um, I find that funny,
I
overall,
did.
but yes.
Speaking of mistakes, I think our mistake was trying to pack this topic into a single episode. This is like a three-parter. Like we needed like a three-part series on it. It's such a big part of both of our stories that it's like I don't know how we're going to get through this in like a single episode.
Well,
Okay, so
let's whistle on imposter syndrome and just, you know, we will be back, I think, for further conversation on this one.
yeah, we'll have to. I think we'll have to.
Put the teaser in there.
So yeah. So teaser, if you resonating with this conversation, come back for more. Um, so imposter syndrome, like what, like I guess the first thing I have to do is pause and think about like what is that really, right? And I think you're right, like it's become a buzzword and I've heard it used in a lot of ways. And I always get worried when I hear buzzwords because I feel like they lose their meaning in the buzz and they just become a thing that people say. And it's like, are we really pausing to think about what is that? what does that actually mean? And what does that mean? And so I think for me, what it means is that feeling like my inside doesn't match what I'm hoping people are seeing on the outside. And I'm trying to like compensate for that discrepancy, in that I'm saying like, okay, this is the me that I want you to see. But inside, I'm like, if you figure out who you're really dealing with, you will run me out of here. Like that's what's going to happen. The minute, as a matter of fact, I was sharing this at work. We were having a conversation about shame and things. And, I mentioned that fear of abandonment. And I think that's because my whole life I have believed that if anyone truly knew who I was, they would like quickly hit the eject button. Like they would just, that's what they would do, is they would say, you out, you're out of my life. You're out of my world. You need to get out of here. Like, we don't want you to be a part of our world. And I think that it's that fear. And I think it does go back to a childhood internal retreat, like growing up in a difficult home where, we were all unhealthy. And so the coping mechanism was, okay, it's better to stay quiet and not rock the boat and not, like say what's really going on, because nobody likes what's really going on. And so that whole idea of, I think that's what shame is really, isn't it? It's like this feeling of, I'm not okay with what I am internally. Like, I'm not okay with that. And I think imposter syndrome, or whatever you want to call it, is a manifestation of that, because then it's, I'm not okay with who I am. And I hope to God you don't figure out who that really is, because then we're in trouble. I don't know when, I can't say when I first identified it, because it goes so far back in my history that, when I was young, so one of the examples of that is body image stuff, right? Like when I was young, I had horrible buck teeth, like for the longest time. Because when I was really young, I got my two front teeth knocked out by a tennis racket when I was like 3. And for the longest time, I didn't have any front teeth. And then when my adult teeth grew in way too early, and like just really like sticking out. So people used to call me Bugs Bunny and like all kinds of other stuff. Plus I was the only Asian kid in my whole school growing up in a small town. I was the scrawny kid. I was the nerdy kid. I was the one kid who could care less about spectator sports. And so I get in and I become an adult, and I'm like pretending to understand what I call forearm ball because, it hardly ever touches the foot. So I call it forearm ball. But that the pointy ball with the, like, what do they call it? The NFL, the National Forearm League. So that like I tease everybody at work gets so mad because they all love football. They'll get into these big conversations about football, and I'm just like, I grew up in Odessa, Texas. I went to Permian High School. I was there the year that the book was being written. I was a sophomore. So I lived in that football culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I always felt like I didn't fit in, that I was this oddball. And I was, so I had to learn a couple of terms, like, and my coworkers now know the secret that I don't really follow football. I don't understand it. And so they make fun of me when I use terms out of context. Like I'll try to use a football example and I'll be like, all right, so then we'll make a goal. And, it's like, and they're like, okay, hold on a minute. What are you talking about? Like, which football are you talking about? And it's like, the one where you kick the ball and it, that's like the only time it ever touches the foot. Anyway.
Hurling,
So I've always felt like I've always struggled when I'm in an environment where, I'll give you another one, is hunting. Like all my friends grew up like hunting and like really into that stuff. My dad was never into that. I never got into that. Oh, another reason I never got into football is because my dad was a boxer in college, and all we ever did was watch boxing, like on the weekends. So like I grew up on boxing, which I did not like because it was too violent, and it was too close to home per se. So anyway, I can go on and on about like feeling disconnected from the outside world and retreating further and further inward. So what's been my solution for that? And I guess I like to end on positive notes. So I'll say, what's the solution? For me, I have found it to be vulnerability and transparency. Like for me to just say, hey guys, I don't like football. If you want to hit the eject button, hit it now. Like, let's go. And what I have found is that people, and it's a really refreshing proposition, because what I have found is the more I share my feelings of imposter syndrome, my feelings of shame, my feelings of fear, the more likely people are to connect with me in a very meaningful way. There's that word, intimacy, which can also be pronounced into me, you see. And so, like, I allow you to get a look inside of me, and we connect in a way that in today's world has become rare, because everybody's guarded, like Brene Brown would say, they've got their armor on, right? And so, it's like I just try to practice a lot of transparency. As a matter of fact, if anything, I get accused of being too open and sharing too rapidly, and it's like, whoa, time out, I wasn't ready to hear that. But just letting people see the real me. And it's been really healing for me. It's helped in building meaningful relationships. And I don't have to carry that imposter syndrome. I can just say, like, hey guys, I feel like I don't know what's going on right now. And I feel like I'm the one who should be knowing what's going on, but I don't. And you guys are all looking to me as the leader thinking, I know, but I'm probably more lost than any of you are. Can we talk about this? So anyway, okay, stopping.
No, and I think those are great components. I'm thinking of those of us making career transitions right now. So with everything that's been going on, there's this whole wave of people that are, learning to move in and out of the federal space in some way. And I was on a call today and I was just like, this may be like the non-educated person in me. And, Stephanie, who I was talking to, was like, huh? She's like, that's actually a really great question, you know? And so on a previous episode, my friend Julius brought up, he said there's this thing of strategic vulnerability and knowing when to show kind of that side and those, because you don't want a leader who walks in every day and says like, oh, I have no idea what's happening and I don't, understand any of the stuff you're talking about. But when it's a critical decision that needs to be made, if they truly don't know, that's the one time I want them to say, I'm not ready to do this yet. Like, I need more information. I need to understand this better, or I'm not in the right place at this moment. Like, and let's just be realistic. Are we talking you need another 6 months or you need another 6 hours? Because that's the other, we put our own expectations, our own components to it. And I think that plays into imposter syndrome in such a big way. I know what I would expect of me. So, like, it's again that kind of like inside outside conversation. Like, oh, if I was sitting across the table and I'm looking at me and I know what my title is, she should know X, Y, and Z. Meanwhile, the person sitting across the table from me might be thinking about what they want to have for lunch. So, you just got
Or what they don't know.
right, exactly. And so, having those moments, and I think it's a great, follow-up piece is, well, how do we create cultures where there is an understanding of how to communicate your expectations or how to just have that space where it's not that we're always singing kumbaya together and finding out, oh, what are we feeling today? And every day is a new icebreaker, but a moment where we know when those check-ins are kind of needed. And so, yes, agree. We're not going to be able to get through all of this in today's episode.
Oh yeah, no way,
That is
no way.
up. But, I think for those of us in midlife transitions, dealing with perfectionism, trying to figure out work-life integration conversations, this is where it all starts to get really muddy because no one wants mom, dad, grandma, grandpa in the back of their head while they're in the board meeting, saying, sit up taller. Like, why did you wear that today? Like, oh my God, you just sniffed really loud and someone probably heard you. And you don't know what the answer to question 5 is. And all of a sudden you're lost in that spiral, as you mentioned, the shame spiral. So in the end, hopefully with people are listening, we've had different experiences that still end up in the same kind of topic area. So this is a very isolating kind of feeling, I think, and that's fear and shame 100% causes this, vacuum of isolation. And then if you do find people that are afraid of the same things, it like festers. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
do I want to be alone? Do I not? Misery loves company. Do we not want that? And there are ways to have the discussion that don't have to be judgmental. And hopefully there's nuggets here. You said, I love you. Today is not the time. Or,
Yeah.
hey, which voice is that today that's yelling at you? Because it's very clear that someone's in your head chatting.
Yeah. Do you need to listen to it? Yeah.
So I'm gonna give you one kind of final thing that I had seen. It was actually at a Cleveland clinic, and I thought it was a great quick liner, and bounce it off you for ideas, and then we'll kind of go into full wrap up. But it said the one of the keys is practicing self acceptance and understanding that it's an active journey rather than a passive state.
Ooh. Ooh. I like that. Yeah, I know. That's awesome.
So you
Yeah.
got a very active journey with this, and then it's not done yet, right? We've got a ways to go.
Yeah. So in my support group, like I'll have guys call me who are like, I can't believe I'm still struggling with this. Like I've been at this for so long and I feel like it's still coming up. And I'll say, okay, let me ask you a question. How often do you charge your cell phone? And inevitably, every single person will say, I charge it every day. I was like, why? Like, haven't you ever gotten a good enough charge where it's like 100% and you're like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to charge it anymore, or I don't need to charge it for the next couple of weeks because I'm good. For me, that's how I see this work is it's just like feeding, eating, sleeping, charging my phone. It just requires a daily practice. There needs to be a daily routine that becomes part of my being that, I get up in the morning and am ready to, like reset and start the day anew with those practices and those actions. Cause I do believe it's like, it starts with action. And, like even some affirmations of, I'm not a bad person. I'm, you know, like I said, I go back to kind of my go-to, which is I'm no better or no worse than anyone else. I'm just an average human being and I love it. Like I love just being an average human being. I don't have to live up to anybody's expectations, not even my own. I just need to be average today. And let's see where the world takes me. For me, in my case, it's also a little bit of a spiritual practice in that I like to, give myself to my higher power and just say like, okay, God, what do you have planned for me today? Like, I'm going to let you drive and I'm going to do the stuff and we'll see how it lands in the end. And I find that really helpful for me because it allows me like to let go of the outcomes and not, like not get so worked up about I have to achieve X, Y, and Z today, but rather to get to a point where it's like, no, I just have to put one foot in front of the other. I like to live, this is going to sound really weird, but I like to live life 24 seconds at a time. Like that's kind of how I think. I mean, there are times where I will pause and have reflections about the future, about the big picture, or the whatever. But generally, I like to stay in the present and kind of take things 24 seconds at a time because that's a much easier bite to swallow than try to swallow even 24 hours or a year or 10 years or, I mean, not all of us won the career lottery, so you guys are going through transitions and, it's like all kinds of exciting new things are popping up. But, it's like, if I just take it one moment at a time, I heard another definition of that 24 seconds is somebody said, a moment can be defined as the length of a breath in and out. And it's like, if I can stay there in that breath, then that's where I find peace. So it's like really helpful for me to do that as well.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong way on the journey. I mean, I hate to say there's some times where maybe I don't want to be fully healed. Maybe there are things that I want to keep that little edge on me. You know, just make me a little bit
A
different. And
little spicy, the
right.
spicy net.
And it's just like grief. There's no one way that you go through grief. And in many of these cases, I think as we go through self journeys, we may be grieving a portion of us that we are seeing as gone now, or hey, that chapter's closed, and there's grief that comes with that. And so definitely a lot of, I think, key components that play into that. And I think it's always about what breath do you want to take an action on, and which one do you just want to live in for the second, because passive isn't necessarily bad, but passive doesn't mean there's going to be movement unless pushed by others. So if I'm sitting there and I'm along for the ride, cool, maybe I just want to be passive in that moment, but eventually you do have to put that energy forward towards what you want, and maybe that's a very small thing, and maybe it's a much larger thing depending on how charged you are, what your capacity is. So I love the charge your phone metaphor. I think that's a fantastic
Yeah.
one. And as we
Well,
talk
it's
about, oh, go ahead.
so yeah, I want to jump in real quick because you reminded me about that. I don't know if I hit on the active and passive as much. Um, Sometimes I think for me, like I used to think being active meant controlling my own destiny, and being passive meant like not controlling my destiny. And I think where I'm at now with it is, to me, being passive means being the victim and just sitting and waiting for the world to happen. And being active is about participating in life. And it's not about the outcomes, but it's about the participation piece of it. And I think that for me is like where that's where I was going with the 24-second. I just realized I didn't push it all the way across the finish line. In that, it's like for me, being active is about really thinking about how am I showing up in the 24 seconds in front of me and participating in the world and participating in life, and showing up with the real me, the me that I have today, and not isolating or retreating into my internal dialogue, or because that's more of a passive action. If I'm just sitting in a room with a bunch of people and having this big long internal dialogue of shame and resentment and fear and all this other stuff, I'm not participating in like life. Versus being active and saying, okay, I'm not going to sit here inside my head. I'm actually going to come out and play with everybody else, and I'm going to be real, and I'll tell you what I know and don't know, but we're going to have a real, like I'm going to be an active participant in this journey with you guys. Okay, thanks for letting me
No,
add that little piece.
I love it. And it takes us into where I love to always close. And oh my gosh, if you didn't make the perfect transition into it, which is think of a moment as a breath. And I like to take some deep breaths to close this out. So if you can take us through a couple 24 seconds and a couple of deep breaths that we can just have that moment for ourselves and what we wanted for. One, it'll be a great wrap up for us because it's a Friday that we're recording this. And for anyone
Yeah.
a Sunday or a Monday, it'll be a great kickoff for them as they get their week going. So, Jed, if you can take us through just a kind of quick moment exercise as we conclude
Yeah.
this portion, because we'll be back to get back into more imposter syndrome and grief and all those other good things on a
Yeah.
third round discussion.
Yeah,
But
be
over to
honored. Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with box breathing. But
no.
that's where, yeah, so there's kind of like the box breathing, which is basically you imagine like whatever that length is, whether it be 3 seconds, 5 seconds, that you breathe in and then you breathe out and then you breathe in and then you breathe out, and it's like a cycle where you're balancing the in breaths with the out breaths. There's a couple other different ways that people do that, but what I like to do is I like to just take as long as a breath as I can in, and then just as long as the one out. And I like to do those in threes. So I'll just go quiet and we can kind of do that together, and just take some really deep, long, slow breaths, get the metabolism sort of settle down, and get ready to join the participate in the weekend. So, all right, there we go. All right, deep breaths. Thanks for letting me play.
Little ASMR at the end for folks.
Yeah.
Well, Amjed, thank you so much for joining again and being resilient through some tech things and timing things, and turned out great. And we can't wait to have you back again. We, as in me, and hopefully every listener. And join in.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me back. I told my wife, she was like, "How did the first one go?" I was like, "I don't know. It must have gone okay because I got invited back."
You certainly, and you'll be back again. And I think we know recurring guests, because these are hard topics to talk about. And yet you and I can do it with a smile. And hopefully it's having other people see it in a little bit of a lighter light, even though these can be very tough topics and conversations. So thank you so much for
For
being
sure.
a partner in this. Appreciate you.